All right, well, welcome, Year 10. We're in significantly lower video quality today. I do apologise. It is simply because I bought my digital SLR camera home and the battery was not charged. So, live and learn. And that battery charger is at school. So, it is what it is. But we're going to have, the audio quality should be the same. The video quality less so. Coming to you from my home today because I'm recording this on a really windy and gross Saturday. So I hope you are all keeping safe. So I've just got some feedback on a few of the lesson videos that people are enjoying them. So I thought, well, I'm going to make you another one. So today you've got a few activities in your booklet around simile and metaphor. Imagery and that kind of thing, and I know most of you will be pretty right with that because it's fairly self-explanatory. So there's lots of activities in there, just revising simile, metaphor, imagery, that kind of stuff. So it's all in your booklet, and they're self-paced activities. So you just do those at your own pace and send them to me. There's one, and I'll pop this in the Google Classroom too. There's one particular activity that asks you to draw the simile metaphor. You don't need to draw them unless you want to, and that's something how you are able to express yourself. That's fine, but you don't need to do that if you don't want to. I'll have a look at that and see if there's an alternative, and I'll again post in the classroom. Today I thought I'd just do a bit of a short kind of joining video regarding context, because the last couple of poems you've looked at have been very, as people have rightly put in their answers, and they've been awesome to read, so well done. They've been looking at they're very pro-war. They've written around the beginning, sort of that early time in World War One when patriotism was really high, and nationalism in particular was quite fervent. And they were, those sort of poems really encourage people to continue, supporting the war effort and so on and so forth. And that's just the way things were. We're now going to cross into, after you've done some work on simile, metaphor and that sort of stuff, cross into the realms of the protest poets. So people like Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, and so on. But in between that, in between those two sort of topics, I want to talk a bit more about context. So in the first video, we talked about the background of World War One and how all this all sort of happened. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that and the literature that came out of it, through poetry and stuff like that. But there's also a really interesting movement I want to talk to you guys about today. It's called Dadaism. That is the name of the movement. It's what they would call an intellectual movement. So if you think last year we talked about romanticism, so how poetry or literature or paintings or any other form of artwork can reflect an idea. And in that case we talked about romanticism, but this time we're going to be turning ideas of romanticism on its head and actually talk about Dadaism. So what is Dadaism? A great definition of this. So Dada traces its origins to the Great War from 1914 to 1918, which left 10 million people dead and some 20 million wounded. Now, on this particular website, it says, for many intellectuals, this person, a researcher, writes, in the National Gallery Catalogue, because this article is about a Dada exhibition. World War One produced a collapse of confidence in the rhetoric. When they say the rhetoric, what that means for us is that it's the way things are done in the world at that time. If you think about our world right now in the 21st century, we are pretty dominated by technology or technological advances, and like particularly with social media as well. So if you think about that as it's the lens we see the world through at the moment. So back before World War One, the lens that people saw the world through, their rhetoric, was this idea of that art is beautiful, It should evoke beauty. Remember Romanticism? It should evoke a sublime beauty. Poetry should be realistic. It should be about, real things, or about, real or imagined beauty, however you see it. It should be about landscapes. It should be about beautiful, influential people, that kind of thing. After World War One, people just, if you think about it, 10 million people died. 10 million people that's huge. And remembering that the population of Australia at that time was about 5 million. So, if you think in that numbers, it's almost as if half of Australia died in that particular war, which is massive, okay? So for many intellectuals, so people who thought about the world, World War One was this crisis in their lives. If they thought, well, how can we express beauty when so many people are dead in such, diabolical circumstances? So back to this researcher who says the culture of rationality that had prevailed, so was prominent in Europe since the Enlightenment. She goes on to quote Freud, who wrote that no event confused so many of the clearest intelligences or so thoroughly debased what is highest. Dada embraced and parodied that confusion. So Dada wished to replace the logical nonsense of the men of today with an illogical nonsense, wrote Gabrielle, that person, whose artist husband, Francis, once tacked a stuffed monkey to a board and called it a portrait of Cézanne. Cézanne was a very famous painter who painted, I think he was an Impressionist painter, actually. I'll have to have a look at that. Anyway, so Dada is a response to the modernity of that time. So people, again, if you look at buildings that were built pre World War One, lots of them are built with a very exaggerated or classical style. So they look like they're from ancient Greece, that sort of thing. Post-war, we get different movements in architecture as well, because people were looking at the war and going, if 10 million people can just be wiped out like that through people's inhumanity to other people, what's the point? What's the point of doing anything that is beautiful anymore? So Dadaist poetry, which I'm going to stick an example of on here for you to have a look at, is nonsensical, because people just could not understand why they should bother. Why do I bother doing something so beautiful and something that celebrates beauty when there is so much death and destruction? So it's pretty nihilistic. Nihilism will say, what's the point of doing this, because we're all going to die and everything's horrible. And it was a short-lived movement. Dada was a short-lived movement, but it comes out of people like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon saying, actually, war is terrible. War is awful. We are dying out here and we didn't want to be part of this war. And I think for us, if we think about our context living today, we can be influenced by what happens regarding us. If you think about it, not to be a downer, but, a pandemic can come along at any time. So do we write as if, do we write to reflect that? Or do we celebrate what is beautiful? Now, I'm a pretty positive person, so I'm going to celebrate what is beautiful. That's fine with me. But I love the idea of Dada, which actually then lends itself to another school of thought called surrealism. So if you've ever heard of Salvador Dali, I'll stick some of his artwork up here too for you to have a look at. All of that sort of stuff was sort of just making fun of people being really rational. Remember the Enlightenment, which happened in the 1500s, around the time of Shakespeare. People were starting to think about science as a really wonderful way of explaining the world. Now, the problem with something like World War One is that it just shattered everybody's understanding that logic could solve our problems and that beauty was worthwhile. So people started to get into Dada and surrealism and just actually make fun of that as well. That's pretty much it. I find Dada really an interesting movement, because these soldiers came back, these people came back from the war and just went, my goodness, my life as I know it, is completely different. I mean, we think about, us being in quarantine and lockdown and that sort of stuff, and it's going to be a temporary thing. Post World War One, the world had changed inexplicably. And so many people, I think, were shocked, just stunned into silence about what Dada could, about what war could do to people. And which is why we get this literature out of that. That's just a little FYI for you, and I will see you guys in the next lesson, which I'm not sure what it is yet because I haven't looked at the next page of the booklet, but I will see you again really soon.